We all know about the haunted house trope in fiction, right? Old spooky house, usually tending towards the extremes of the spectrum, either a rundown shack or a pristine mansion surrounded by dead trees. Seemingly innocuous to the characters, but later turns out to be evil through being haunted by ghosts or being built on some Native American burial ground or just straight up alive and hates you. And the characters eventually have to figure out the mysteries of the house to live or something like that. Well, the house from House of Leaves, despite being the titular figure, is actually not the main focus of the plot, but rather is used as a plot device to draw out the characters' hidden traumas. Now, this book, House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski, is probably one of the most unique novels I ever heard of, and nonetheless read. The way it uses typography and meta-narratives is, and I know it's often overset nowadays, but I truly mean it when I say that it's ahead of its time. I mean, it quite literally uses its dedication page to tell the reader that the book is not for them. I mean, look at this. It's very likely one of, if not my favorite novel, but many people take one glance at its 700 page count and its pages that look like this, or this, or this, or these things, and decide that the book is, not for their taste, or that it's too smart or too complicated for them, when in reality it's a lot easier to understand than something like Ulysses or Animal Farm, at least a simpleton like me. Now, when I was first reading this book, I thought the beginning was a tad too slow for my liking, but I'm pretty glad I pushed through, and in hindsight, the slow pace of the beginning helps to build and contrast with the parts where everything really falls into disarray, including the text itself. However, to fully discuss this book, I genuinely, and this means a lot coming from someone who hasn't read a book on their own accord for 5 years, but I really think that this book is best experienced through reading it in full and coming to your own conclusions than having some fool on the internet tell you what it's about. With that being said, let me, a fool on the internet, tell you what I think the book is about. Now, let's start with a very brief summary of the book. There's an LA tattoo artist named Johnny Truant, real last name notwithstanding, stumbling across an unfinished manuscript by a recently deceased old blind man named Zampano about a fictional series of shorts and movies, not just in the way that House of Leaves is fictional, but an in-universe made-up series that, despite Zampano's in-depth writings about it, is not real, neither in our universe nor the books. Nevertheless, Zampano's writings detail a series called The Navidson Record, which follows the titular Will Navidson, his girlfriend Karen Green, and their 2 young children, Chad and Daisy, as they move into a mysterious house they discover to house non-Euclidean geometry that would make Lovecraft go insane twice over, such as a hallway on the outer interior wall that should clearly be visible from the outside due to how deep it goes, yet isn't. As Truant takes it upon himself to organize the old man's pages, he starts to lose his mind, similar to many Lovecraftian horrors, as he finds many parallels between his life and the manuscript's events, which make his underlying traumas and mental conditions worsen exponentially. Well, as bad as a LA tattoo artists can get. Now, one circumstance that reoccurs throughout the novel extremely frequently is that many, if not all of the characters, have major parental issues, but most prominently is that of dead, absentee, or abusive father figures. A major theme of the book that Danielewski hammers into the reader's brain is that father-son relationships are vital to one's development as a person, and when that relationship between father and son sours due to one reason or another, that can have very long-lasting effects. Many characters in this novel happen to have this trait, with Will Navidson and his brother Tom growing up with both an absentee and abusive father, what a steal, as well as his wife, Karen Green, growing up with a stepfather that sexually abused both her and her older sister by shoving them in a well and taking turns doing things to each of them, as well as our fictionally non-fictional protagonist Johnny Truant, who had not one but 2 examples of bad father-son dynamics, with his biological father dying in a truck crash when he was young, and his stepfather who'd physically abused him when he misbehaved in school, which was often. Johnny also had seen his mother get institutionalized when she started to strangle him as an 8-year-old during one of her episodes, but that's a whole separate thing. Regardless, these relationships ended up leaving long-lasting and deep scars both mentally and emotionally. For Will, he and his brother were forced to become self-sufficient, surviving with just each other to lean on, but when their father died, their relationship became estranged, their only link to each other being in the context of abuse. For Karen, the effects are much more explicitly seen in the text compared to Navidson, as her prominent phobia of small, dark, enclosed spaces is heavily implied to have originated from, the well stuff. For Johnny, his experience of having a good upbringing with his biological parents suddenly interrupted with not only his father dying and his mother being institutionalized, but also being relocated into an abusive household, which likely led to his chronic substance abuse later in life during the events of the book, as a way of coping, and likely caused his subconscious descent into madness and his worsening schizophrenia he likely inherited from his mother. Now, there is one very poignant symbol that Zampano uses often in his manuscript that helps to reinforce this theme. Around halfway through the book, it's seen that Zampano had a reoccurring symbol in the manuscript that he had elected to strike through, the only part of the book he'd chosen to omit, though Johnny was able to restore it. This symbol was the Minotaur. Now, including the Minotaur in the manuscript mythologically makes sense. It's a reference to the legend of Theseus, where he encounters the Minotaur Asterius trapped in the labyrinth, a structure very similar to the winding and obfuscated nature of the titular house. However, that doesn't really explain why he would omit such a seemingly trivial piece of allusion, especially considering the fact that the very same man wrote a literal 5-page rant on the Greek myth of Echo. However, as we learn later in the chapter, Zampano reveals to those not very literate in Greek mythos that the Minotaur is the bastard son of King Minos, the very king that gave Theseus his quest. Zampano then theorizes that the reason the Minotaur is trapped in the labyrinth is that King Minos is ashamed of his son, trapping himself in the labyrinth he quite literally ordered to be built, to make sure that his mistake of a son was to never see the light of day, to never besmirch his own name as king. The Minotaur, thus, is used as a symbol throughout the story to essentially equate to a past mistake or a choice that one feels ashamed of and hides deep within themselves, but must eventually face. The very Minotaur itself is another example of an abusive father-son relationship, as King Minos trapped his own innocent son in a hidden maze just to hide a shameful past away. However, just one more example of abuse is not the only thing we can glean from the Minotaur. Zampano struck through every mention of it for a reason. It can't just be because the idea of including it was too dark, because much darker things happen in the novel than just another abusive father. Perhaps Zampano was personally affected by his own Minotaur, and he felt the detail was something he couldn't bear to confront yet. Was Zampano another example of a complicated father-son dynamic? Well, we can speculate all we like, but at the end of the day, we don't know. There are too many details obfuscated from us in the book that many of the mysteries stay exactly that. A mystery. But I think that's the point. This book is not for us. You see, the characters in this book, House of Leaves, are not the only examples of complicated father-son dynamics. Allow me to get a bit meta for a second. The author of House of Leaves, not Zampano, but the real author, Mark Z. Danielewski, wrote this book for a reason. In 1993, his father, Tad Danielewski, a Polish filmmaker, was dying of renal failure as a result of cancer. When Mark learned this, he immediately started a series of bus rides west to the hospital. Over the 3 sleepless days and nights he headed to the hospital, he wrote about 100 pages worth of a new work to cope. This work was not House of Leaves, not yet at least. It was called Redwood, and when he presented this work to his father to impress him, his father responded that he should try pursuing a career at the post office. Needless to say, these weren't exactly the words of encouragement he was hoping for. The very next day, he shredded every page, throwing the resulting confetti away in a dumpster. His sister Poe, however, had taken it upon herself to recover the scraps and piece them back together, allowing Mark to later revise Redwood into the House of Leaves we know today. Poe Danielewski herself is also an artist who made an entire album dedicated to the experience of losing her father, similar to her brother's House of Leaves, called Haunted, which is a great companion piece to the novel, but is a whole can of worms in a video already full of tangents, so I will not get into it. However, the point is, House of Leaves is a direct product of Danielewski losing his father, who, from his words to Mark, likely was an already complicated relationship. Now, there are many parallels we can draw to both the Danielewski siblings and various characters in House of Leaves, such as assuming Johnny is a stand-in for Mark, or that Poe is similar to Johnny, but it will never be anything more than speculation. The internet's full of fan theories that nothing in the book is real, that it's all in Johnny's head, or that Johnny's mother is the real author of the book, or that Zampano's secretly Johnny's biological father, but that's all there'll ever be. Theories. To its core, the book is about fathers and sons, as it was the very thing that invoked its creation. But we'll never fully understand the book, because it's not for us. In the words of Johnny Truant, or really Mark Z. Danielewski, the greatest of love letters are always encoded for the one, and not the many.